Welcome aboard, applicants, for another Battling the Big Bad Baby Bar review. We're going to be taking up now question 4. Question 4. The call for question 4 begins with number 1. What tort claims can neighbor reasonably raise against Woody and Chuck? And what defenses, if any, can each or both of them reasonably make? Discuss. Number 2. If neighbor prevails against Woody and contractor, what damages may neighbor receive, and how should how should such damages be apportioned? Discuss. Well, right here in our call, we should immediately see tort claims, and let me point that out right by highlighting it. Tort claims is our area of law. Now we can immediately on our screen slam down our shopping list, which would be, and I'll just throw on for shopping list here. You don't have to put this down. I'm just putting this down for illustrative purposes. Intent. Now you have to put down intent here. Intent, negligence, or I should say not. You don't have to put it down in this particular order. You can have any form of your shopping list or checklist that you so desire. Put that down at this stage. So why? So when we come back and read the call, or excuse me, the facts, we'll be able from our checklist to answer the call. Okay. After negligence, we'll throw down strict liability, products liability, other torts, and excuse me, let me get this in. Oh, yeah, and third party. Now we could have actually done this even slicker by just putting the first letter, and that would have looked something like this, which would have saved a great deal of time. But I just wanted to show you what would it look like if you had to put more words in your shopping list, just because this is how it would look. But if you wanted to save some time for time management, I highly recommend you could just put down the first, capitalize the first letter. And remember, this goes for any shopping list or any particular checklist that you have. You can do this too. Okay, like taking the first letter and making that the capital letter. Why? Again, time management. Okay, now down to reading our facts. Remember, we call this our question because the bar examiners call it question. So these facts represent our question. So to answer our question, we should read our facts, correct? And in answering the question, we've answered our call. You get the point. Okay, now, I'll begin now. Woody lived in a cabin in a rural neighborhood. Woody had an outhouse that created an offensive odor. Woody decided to install an underground septic system so that he could have an indoor bathroom. Woody discovered that the septic system he planned on installing would not fit on his land, and that a portion of the system would have to extend underneath neighbor's vacant lot, which was situated next to Woody's property. A fence had once stood on the property line between the two lots, but all that remained were some broken posts. Since Woody knew that neighbor was overseas for a year, he decided to install the septic system during neighbor's absence. He hired Chuck, an independent licensed contractor, to do the installation. During construction, Chuck saw the broken fence posts and suspected that they marked Woody's property line. He told Woody that a part of the septic system, if installed, would end up underneath the adjacent lot. Woody scolded Chuck for talking too much and then demanded that Chuck cut down the maple tree on neighbor's lot to make room for the septic system. Because Chuck needed the work, he cut down the tree, dug up the ground, and installed the septic system. Woody later burned the wood from the tree as firewood because he liked the ambience burning or the ambience burning wood created. Neighbor returned from overseas and discovered what Chuck and Woody and Chuck did to his vacant land, or vacant lot, and his maple tree. Neighbor sued Woody and Chuck for damages. Well, first of all, we should immediately come to this understanding that what we have here, because technically we've got neighbor who is suing two parties, we have a third party situation. So we should immediately in our mind be thinking a third party, and what a third party issue. Just right off the top of our heads here, we probably should be thinking joint and several liability. Now this is just right off the cuff. We're not even beginning to even fashion or form our call or answering the call yet. Now that we've read the facts, dealt with this one issue that instantly came to mind, we want to make sure to focus our answering around the calls. Call number one says again what tort claims can neighbor reasonably raise against Woody and Chuck, and what defenses, if any, can each of them reasonably discuss. So we could easily say at this point that we could say that it's neighbor v. Woody, neighbor v. Chuck. Now that would be dealing with this particular facts here, that neighbor sued Woody and Chuck for damages. Now down to call number two. If neighbor prevails against Woody and contractor, what damages may neighbor receive and how should such damages be apportioned? Discuss. Now down here we should probably throw in something called damages, okay? And then we'll deal with this as our topic and discussion rolls into this particular issue, okay? Probably we want to make sure that this is 1A and 1 small b, so that the bar examiners understands that when we make neighbor v. Woody, we're addressing the first call. When we say neighbor v. Chuck, we're also addressing the first call, but in a term called bifurcated, okay? It means we're taking a call and breaking it into two, bifurcated. Now, and then we're taking the second call and addressing it under the header damages, which we will talk about under joint and several liability shortly. That's why that instantly popped out to me, and I think it should pop out to you or pop to your mind. Wow, neighbor here is suing two people. I wonder if those two people are jointly and severally liable in torts. Just something to think about, and we will get to that issue in due time. But now let's ask ourselves here, after having read the facts once in what we call as movie mode, to get a full understanding of what the facts are pointing us in terms of a story, we're now going to read the facts through our shopping list or checklist of our choice, making sure to spend a time management, a portion time on that. In other words, not taking all the words and writing them down, but maybe taking the first letter, capitalizing it, and then using that as a prompt when we're reading the facts, that we're not missing any issues when we're reading the facts. We're making sure to spot every single issue that is present in those facts. Okay, with that in mind, let's go back up to the facts. Woody lived in a cabin in a rural neighborhood. Woody had, does this so far raise anything, these particular set of facts? Doesn't necessarily go anywhere, but these would represent foundational facts, something that would support a later argument. So keep this in mind, that this often does happen. Woody lived in a cabin in a rural neighborhood will support an additional element, maybe some kind of supportive, maybe a fact, that it would represent a fact that would support a particular issue later on in your analysis. Remember, there are no such thing as a homeless fact. Every one of these facts has a home under an issue. Now, next sentence. Woody had an outhouse that created an offensive odor. Interesting. This is excuse me, getting us to think about possibly nuisance, maybe. We'll see how far this offensive odor is present in our facts. Woody decided to install an underground septic system so that he could have an indoor bathroom. Now, at this point, Woody had an outhouse that created an offensive odor. This would be possibly a nuisance issue. So let's mark that down. Making sure to look at our shopping list to make sure that we're not missing anything. Okay, that is a spottable issue. We'll throw down nuisance. And remember, do we have to talk about both types of nuisance, private and public? Probably in this instance, just private nuisance. Okay. We'll come back and fill that in later. Right now we're just issue spotting, creating our issues as we roll through the facts. Now, Woody decided to install an underground septic system so that he could have an indoor bathroom. Still, probably more foundational facts here. Woody discovered that the septic system, this is the one talked about in the prior sentence, he planned on installing would not fit on his land. Uh-oh. And that a portion of the system would have to extend underneath neighbor's vacant lot, which was situated next to Woody's property. I know what you might be thinking. Absolutely, Woody's most likely going to be building under that neighbor's vacant lot. It's possible. Still, these are foundational facts. They're definitely getting us thinking in that direction. We need a little bit more in terms of facts to see if this actually does develop. A fence had once stood on the property line between the two lots, but all that remained were some broken fence posts. Interesting. We might use that later for additional facts concerning whether or not Woody knew, maybe when he built this particular septic system underneath neighbor's vacant lot, that he knew where the property lines were by the fact of what? That all that remained were some broken fence posts. It's possible. We might use those as additional facts. Now, at this point, you might be saying, wow, we have a lot of additional facts. That's right. We're going to be doing a little bit of juggling of our additional facts. But remember, every one of these, when I say additional facts, I mean background facts. Every one of these additional or background facts will have a home. In other words, there will be an issue that will be talked about underneath. Since Woody knew that neighbor was overseas for a year, he decided to install the septic system during neighbor's absence. Okay, now we have something to work with. Now he decided to install this, but did he himself do the installation? No, he hired Chuck, an independent licensed contractor, to do the installation. Right here at this paragraph here, we should be instantly thinking vicarious liability. Absolutely. And under vicarious liability, we are primarily keeping our attention focused on what? It's the legal term respondeat superior. Why, you might say? Let's come back up here and take a look at the facts. That Woody was hiring right here, hired Chuck. Big important fact right there. He hired Chuck. In other words, Chuck could very well be his employee. Chuck could be an independent contractor. Either way, he hired Chuck, and that's what creates the respondeat superior relationship. Now down here, okay, now that we've looked at this vicarious liability respondeat superior, now let's come back up. Now you might be thinking, what about this paragraph here? There are a lot of foundational additional facts up in here. Absolutely. What did he hire Chuck to do? The installation. What was the installation dealing with? Absolutely correct. It was the installation of that septic system underneath neighbor's vacant lot. And right off the bat, you should be thinking, underneath neighbor's vacant lot, what is that? Where would that go to? That would probably go to trespass to land. Okay, because underneath, above, on top, through, you're making an entry onto the property of another intentionally. Or you could say this in a more formal sense, that it was an volitionally intentional act by the defendant that caused an entry onto the plaintiff's property. Now, just enough to remember here, under trespass to land, unlike other intentional torts, you only have to intend to cause the specific act that causes the entry. That's why even a mere mistake upon where a person is at the time is not enough to defeat trespass to land. The fact that you made the act, intended the act that causes the entry, is enough to satisfy trespass to land. Coming back up now. During construction, we're in construction stage now. Chuck saw the broken fence posts and suspected that they marked Woody's property line. See, at this point, we're looking at that Chuck is aware. Chuck is very aware that there's something up. There's a property line here, and this property line made him suspect that they marked Woody's property line. Possibly they even marked another property line, that being neighbor's vacant lot. He told Woody, after Chuck found out these facts, he told Woody that a part of the septic system, if installed, would end up underneath the adjacent lot. Woody scolded Chuck for talking too much and then demanded that Chuck cut down the maple tree on neighbor's lot to make room for the septic system. Now, this fact that Chuck had told Woody about the septic system, if installed, would end up underneath the adjacent lot puts Woody in a very interesting situation, because Chuck was originally hired, remember up here, as an independent licensed contractor, which means Woody wouldn't have been necessarily liable for the conduct of Chuck, because what? Woody was not in control of how Chuck carried out the particular task, job, employment. But remember, it's not an employee, it's more of the job or task. So Woody was not in control of how Chuck carried out this particular task. Now, and that's what made Chuck an independent contractor. However, when Woody came to Chuck when Chuck came to Woody and told Woody that part of the septic system, if installed, would end up underneath the adjacent lot, this, in essence, has changed Chuck's, you might say, his classification, in a sense. He's no longer being classified now as an independent contractor if Woody says continue to do it anyway. Because now what Woody is saying is, you are going to be doing things now according to how I want you to do things. You have now entered into what's called as course and scope of employment. In other words, now what has happened is Woody has created an employment relationship with Chuck. Now, because Woody, this is what I'm pointing to when I say this, when he scolded Chuck for talking too much and then demanded that Chuck cut down the maple tree on neighbor's lot to make room for the septic system. At this point, Woody is creating that employment relationship in respondeat superior that is now putting Woody in control of the course and conduct of how Chuck is to carry out this particular task. And that, in essence, my friends, makes Chuck an employee, and now Woody is directly liable for the activities of Chuck. Now, this is a very interesting turn of events. Now, because Chuck needed the work, he cut down the tree, dug up the ground, and installed the septic system. Woody later burned the tree from or wood from the tree as firewood because he liked the ambience burning wood created. Now down here, we want to make sure to cover the issues concerning the tree. Trespass to land would be involving the septic system, and there would be trespass to chattel for the tree, and there would be, because of the burning, remember, conversion is a significant control or possession over the property of another. And that property of another here would have been the maple tree. The significant control or possession or dominion was evidenced when Woody later burned the wood from the tree as firewood. This you cannot take the wood in reverse order now and take it back from the ambient burning state that it's in and put it back into its former condition. That's not going to happen. It's been converted, and that's why this activity of Woody, not only cutting down the wood but burning it, represents conversion. Not just trespass to chattels of the tree, but a conversion of the tree. Now, neighbor returned from overseas and discovered what Woody and Chuck did to his vacant lot and his maple tree. Neighbor sued Woody and Chuck for damages. Now, down here, we want to make sure to not forget what Chuck has done as well. Chuck did what? Chuck had to trespass on the land in order to install the septic system. He had to cut down the tree, trespass to chattel, and he had to conversion of the maple tree as well. I'm just going to write down maple tree so that the bar examiners know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about trespass, chattels, and conversion. Trespass land would be probably the septic system. I want to make sure we bring that up to their attention here as well. Land, septic system. Okay, and then trespass chattel. I think at this point, yep, there we go. Maple tree. Okay. Now down here under damages, we're going to make sure to talk about two very important kinds of damages. General damages and special damages. And because we're dealing with intentional torts, we may be able to throw in punitive damages. Exactly. We're going to be putting in the rules after we throw in our shopping list, and then we got to throw in our joint civil liability, the two issues that go with that, contribution and indemnification. Now you might be asking, why are we throwing this all these issues down ahead of time? Why can't we just write them one right after the other? Well, it's because in a time management situation, this will give you a good lay of the land per se. Okay, you're being able now to see how much time do I really have to spend on each particular task the bar examiners have given to me. Now you can see here pretty easily our damages can be dispatched with, but there's going to be some back and forth arguments up here under neighbor versus Woody and neighbor versus Chuck concerning whether or not it was Woody that knew about the property line or Chuck knew about the property line. And the other one, the situation of revolving around that would involve the installation of the septic system and then the cutting down and burning of that maple tree. Now, with this down on our paper, now we have a pretty good outline of how we're going to go about answering the two calls. So we can now remove our shopping list and begin our paper. Now, private nuisance. Under private nuisance, we're looking at what? That it's an action by the defendant that causes what? A substantial and unreasonable interference with the plaintiff's use and enjoyment of their land. Now, was there a substantial and unreasonable interference here? Well, oh, do you really see nuisance here? Only in a very small sense, and that's why we want to make sure that we come up here and we see that created an offensive odor. So we said that Woody had an outhouse that created an offensive odor. Now over here is that we're just going to throw in a quick little fact here. Here the facts state that Woody had an outhouse that created an offensive odor. Now we got to ask ourselves: was this odor was this odor picked up by neighbor? Did it? In other words, did it offend neighbor? Did it interfere with neighbor's use and enjoyment of his or her land? Well, we got to make sure that it's. I don't see that here, but I'm just wanted to make sure that we mention the fact. We've raised it here. The facts state that Woody had an outhouse. Excuse me. That created an offensive odor. Trying to find if there's substantial. It is uncertain whether neighbor's use and enjoyment of their land was interfered with by this odor. And then therefore I'd probably say thus this claim appears weak. I'm just trying to, or would the septic system be the nuisance? You know, that is a very good argument. We'll think about that. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, it was uncertain whether neighbors' use and enjoyment of their land was interfered with by this odor. However, neighbor may argue that what? The installation of the septic system, let's see, septic system, oh there, yeah, system, substantially interfered with his or her use of their land by its intrusion onto the vacant lot. Also, neighbor may assert that this installation was unreasonable because the risk of, let's see, the risk of future, no, let's think, the risk did not outweigh the utility of the, I'll go back up here and say that it could have an indoor bathroom, so that, okay, the risk could outweigh the utility so that Woody could have an indoor bathroom. The risk of harm, the risk of harm did not harm to neighbors' property, did not outweigh the utility of Woody receiving an indoor bathroom. Okay. Thus, this claim appears maybe thus neighbor may not. Well, see, you know what? Let's say this: the court will likely find that neighbor that Woody created a private nuisance onto neighbor's property. Okay, so we're basically dealing with the facts. We dealt with all of our important facts by the elements here. Now down here, now that we've dealt with this, we've dispatched it. Got to keep trucking along here. Got to keep moving. Now down here under vicarious liability, an employer is liable for all torts of their employees during the course and scope of employment. Here, and we're going to make sure to use paragraph by paragraph what arguments both the parties will make, Woody and neighbor. Here, neighbor will point out that Woody is liable for all of the activities of Chuck because Chuck was hired by Woody to install the septic system. However, Woody may counter argue that Chuck was not an employee but was a independent licensed, we want to make sure to use all of our facts here, an independent licensed contractor. Licensed contractor, make sure I'm correct on the facts. Licensed contractor. And that Woody did not control the manner that Chuck carried out the installation. Now, is that where it ends? Now, not necessarily, because why? That's exactly right. What we have here is we have Woody who's saying that Chuck should carry out the task regardless of whether or not regardless of Chuck's awareness that carried out such installation would actually create a tort. Right here we see this fact here. He told Woody that part of the septic system, if installed, would end up underneath the adjacent lot. Woody scolded Chuck for talking too much and demanded that Chuck cut down the maple tree on neighbor's lot to make room for the septic system. Now down here, we're going to try to point out that fact here. Neighbor will argue that Woody's scolding of Chuck's Chuck's, let's see, come back up here real quick. Right here. Here we go. Highlight this. Woody scolded Chuck for talking too much and then demanded that Chuck cut down the maple tree on neighbor's lot to make room for the septic system. Okay. Okay, the court will like, excuse me, let me come down here further. Neighbor will argue that Woody's scolding of Chuck essentially created an employment relationship between Woody and Chuck because Woody is now controlling the method and manner of Chuck's conduct during the installation. Also, in addition, I'll put this in addition, neighbor will show that Chuck, during the course and scope of his employment with Woody, intruded onto, let me come up here and grab the most important facts up here. Here it would, would intrude underneath the adjacent lot. Would result. Let me see this again. In addition, neighbor will show that Chuck, during the course and scope of his employment with Woody, intruded, excuse me, onto the vacant lot, cut down the maple tree. And cut down the maple tree. Excuse me. So at this point, what neighbor is trying to point out is that indeed, Woody, you're liable for the conduct of Chuck because now Chuck is no longer your independent contractor. Chuck is your employee. Now down here we'll say therefore neighbor will show that Woody is liable for all the torts committed by Chuck during the course and scope of Chuck's installation of the septic system. Now trespass to land should be a slam dunk on that one. Trespass to land is what? Trespass to land is the entry onto the land of another. Here, neighbor will argue that Woody via Chuck's installation intruded onto the land. Oh, let me add this up here. Let me add just an additional one. Without consent or privilege. Okay. Here, neighbor will argue that Woody, via Chuck's installation, intruded onto the land of, or intruded onto neighbor's vacant lot. Okay. Woody may counter argue that he did not know of the exact location of the property lines. We know that can't be, and we'll point out now why that is. Okay, however, because we're swinging the arguments back and forth, neighbor will argue that the broken, now we've got to go back up and grab a fact now as to the broken fence right here. I think it's right here. So what do you, okay. First of all, a fence had once stood between the two lots, but all that remained were some broken fence posts. Okay. Okay. However, let me point out three particular facts that are going to argue, that neighbor's going to argue against Woody here. Woody will argue, or his neighbor will argue that Woody was aware of the property lines because, one, Woody was neighbor's let's see, right, Woody owned land. It says here that they were, what does it say concerning the two? Okay, like they were next to each other. Okay, Woody owned land next to Wood. Okay, Woody owned land next to neighbor because Woody next to neighbor's vacant lot. Woody was, let me go back up and grab the facts up here. Woody was aware that a fence had once stood between the property line between the two lots. Right here. Okay. Let me come down here and grab this. Okay. Woody was aware that a property line, that a fence once stood between neighbors' consent. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we're going to tackle that here. That neighbor did not consent, even though neighbor was away of having Woody come onto his property and through Chuck and install that septic system. Yeah, that's the trip. Exactly. That's exactly right. Woody was aware that a fence was stood between the properties, the lots, and that Woody should have been aware that the broken fence, I need to grab, sorry about the going back and forth here, that the broken fence posts were evidence of the property line. Right down here. And we should have been aware that the wood from the broken fence post was evidence of the property line. And also, I'm going to put this out there too. Moreover, neighbor will indicate that he or she did not consent to Woody installing the septic system. Will indicate that he or she did not consent to Woody installing the septic system, even though neighbor was away on, I believe it's vacation. Let me double check here. Yeah, he was away. Let's see. What to do? Overseas, was overseas for a year. Okay. Therefore, neighbor will likely prevail in their claim. Of trespass to land against Woody. Okay. Now, trespass to chattel maple tree. Trespass to chattel is the intentional act by the defendant that causes an interference with the possessory interest in plaintiff's chattel. Okay, now here, without consent or privilege. Here, neighbor will argue that he or she did not give Woody consent to have Chuck cut down the maple tree However, Woody will indicate Woody would counter argue that he was not aware of Chuck's conduct. Or I'm not going to say however. I'm going to say that Woody will counter argue that he was not aware of Chuck's conduct. However, neighbor will show that Woody not only insisted on Chuck installing the septic system and cutting down the tree, but also, let's see here. Actually, well, we'll show that Woody, not, I probably shouldn't say not only, insisted, yeah, he instructed. Exactly. Instructed Chuck to install the septic system and cut down the tree. Let's see here. Yeah. Simply because neighbor was away for 1 year did not give Woody consent or privilege there we go, to instruct Chuck to cut down the maple tree. Therefore, neighbor will likely, or I should say, the court will likely find that neighbors will prevail. On this claim. Okay, now in addition here we're going to throw in a conversion discussion. Conversion is the substantial dominion and control by the defendant of plaintiff's personal property without consent or privilege. Here, the facts state that Woody, let's go back up to our facts real quick. What did he do with that maple tree? Burn the maple tree. Burn the wood from the tree as firewood because he liked the ambience burning wood created. Right here. Here the facts state that Woody not only instructed Chuck to cut down the maple tree, but also burned the wood from the maple tree because Woody loved the ambience the ambience burning wood created. Hence, it is safe to say that Woody converted the maple tree Now Woody converted the maple tree. Oh, I should say this. That Woody intended to convert the maple tree by burning the wood, maple wood, or I should say burning the wood. Therefore, or thus, the court will likely find that Woody is liable for the fair market value of the maple tree at the time the wood was converted through burning the wood, or I should say the wood was converted, comma, burning the wood. Now we're going to check. Now we're going to have a lot of supra rule statements and a lot of supra discussion here, because it's going to be very similar in terms of the septic system. What we're going to say here is supra, or as discussed above. I'm just going to say as discussed above. Here we're going to say neighbor will hold Chuck liable for trespass to land because Chuck carried out Woody's instructions even though Chuck suspected that the property line would be intruded upon if the septic system was installed. However, Chuck will point out that excuse me here. Chuck will point out that he was an employee of Woody and hence should not be liable for the torts that Woody instructed him to complete. I put comma here would be the installation of a septic system. Now, then we're going to say, now, thus, neighbor may not be able to, and the tree, and cutting down the tree, the maple tree. Thus, neighbor may not be able to hold Chuck liable for trespass to land. Now, here's an argument we could think about on second thought on this. If you have second thoughts during your writing, you know what? Entertain them. Sometimes the first read, second read may not yield what a third read or third consideration would yield, and that is we might have an argument here that neighbor may be able to say that, hey Chuck, it may not be that you intended to intrude or trespass onto the land, but that you intended the conduct that trespass on the land. And I still think that that's a very weak argument because Chuck is under the vicarious responsibility of who? The relationship that was created when Chuck essentially became an employee of Woody. When Woody, scolded Chuck and told Chuck, regardless of Chuck's suspicions, that Chuck should still install that septic system and cut down the maple tree. So I think neighbor is still going to have a hard time. Exactly. Exactly. So that's why sometimes you need to double check this. May need to, it's just a quick double check. Go, okay, we're on the right track. Now down here, as discussed above, we're gonna still. This is the beauty part of as discussed above. We get to go right in now to our A, and remember from our last few discussions what A is. A equals points. A meaning application. Application brings points. Points are a good thing. Absolutely. Okay. Here. Now here, neighbor. Now you might be asking, would you type the name neighbor in every time? You could think about doing that. It's possible every so often throwing in the word neighbor, that name neighbor. Sometimes though, if you want to shorthand it, you could say n, like neighbor, and then do something like this to save time for writing n. So we'll probably do that from here on just to show you that trick. Because what it does is you're telling your reader that yes, exactly, hooray for points. Exactly. The word neighbor now is being substituted for the capital N, and that's what putting the N in parentheses means. Okay. Now here neighbor N will argue that Chuck is liable for the trespass of what? The maple tree. When Chuck cut down the tree. However, Chuck, and we'll come up here and do the exact same thing for Chuck, capital C here for Chuck. Okay, in terms of some shorthanding the name Chuck for C. Capital C. So here, however, C will argue that, and we'll come up here, and that Woody instructed him. We'll do the exact same thing for Woody, because it's always a good thing to get in the habit of doing that even up further in our analysis, because this would have saved a whole lot of time for writing out the names and such. So that's just something to think about on a future writing, a future writing exercise. Because the thing to do, we're doing it right now. We're practicing, and we practice to get proficient. The more we're proficient, the more we're relaxed, the more we learn these very important time-saving tools, like taking the name neighbor, putting a capital N, taking the name Chuck, putting a capital C, taking the name Woody, putting a capital W. These things, plus how we're breaking apart our discussions here, are essentially excellent time-saving tools that is going to help refine our analysis. Because the more time and thoughtfulness that we can give our analysis within that 60-minute time period, the more, again, hooray for points, the more points we'll yield. And that's the best part, is application will yield a better A, and a better A means possibly better points. Okay, and more points at that. Now, however, C will argue that Woody instructed him what? To cut down the maple tree. Thus, Woody, or Chuck, or his neighbor, excuse me, will likely not prevail in holding C liable for the cutting down of the maple tree. Now at this point, I want you to see something. See, this is a excellent analysis, but it's still thin. There's not a whole lot of facts in here. We could add some additional facts in here to really bulk this up. I'll show you here some things we could add to this up here, up above. What did Woody actually engage in to cut when he was cutting down the maple tree? Well, Chuck needed the work, so he cut down the maple tree, dug up the ground, and installed the septic system. Right down here. Let's use those facts down here. Right, I'll show you where you can throw those in. So here, right here. Here, the facts state that Chuck actually, we'll borrow that C up here, so we'll just do that. So we'll just come down and just change this. Remember, we're learning at this point. Time, yes, it's a very big issue at this point, but we're learning a process. As we get that process down, the quicker we'll be able to do it during that 60-minute period. But we still have to get proficient in that process. That process is good analysis. That's what we're doing right now. The facts state that Chuck, what? Right here, this is, let me go back up because I need to get a refresh on the facts here. He needed the work, he cut down the tree, dug up the ground, and installed the septic system. Come down here. Okay. So he cut down the, dug up the ground. Okay, I'm sorry. Cut down the maple tree, dug up the ground, and installed a septic system. Neighbor will argue that C is liable for trespass of the maple tree when Chuck cut down the tree. However, C will argue that Woody instructed him to cut down the maple tree. Okay, hence C will argue that it was Woody that was liable, that Woody was liable. There we go. For cutting down the tree. Okay, excellent. Okay. Thus, N will likely not prevail and hold C liable for cutting down of the maple tree. Now, down here under conversion, same set as above, as discussed above. What now we're going to say is here the facts state that Woody took the maple tree wood and burned the wood. Neighbor or N will argue that C carried out W's. Sorry about that. Should have kept that with this capital W there. N will argue that C carried out W's instructions and cut down the maple tree, which allowed W to burn the wood. However, C will again indicate that C was instructed by W to install the septic system and cut down the maple tree. Thus, N will likely not prevail in holding C liable for conversion of the maple tree. Okay. Now down here under damages, damages are general damages. Pain and suffering. Here you could say, you could add the aspect about general damages are non-economic damages. Here, if N is successful against W and C, then N may recover their pain and suffering from returning home after returning home and discovering the installed septic system. Also, N may recover loss of the ability to enjoy life. Okay. Now down here under special damages, here, if N is successful, special damages are economic damages. Here, if N is successful against W and C, then N may recover their lost wages, lost future earnings, out-of-pocket expenses in paying for a new maple tree, and possibly I don't see that they possibly medical expenses. I don't see that. I'm gonna take that out of there. And out-of-pocket expense. Oh, injunction. Exactly. That's exactly where we're headed to. It's exactly right. And out-of-pocket expenses in paying for a new maple tree. Now, punitive damages. This would be here if N can establish that W and C willfully and wantonly committed their torts, then N may recover punitive damages against W and C. Joint several liability. Or actually, before we get to that, I want to do injunction. Under the equitable theory of relief or recovery, N may argue or may N may succeed. Or I should say, wait, try it. No. Let me first put down a rule statement for injunction. Injunction is an equitable theory of recovery whereby the plaintiff may require, or I say the court, excuse me, may require a party to perform or abstain or prohibit them from future performance. Or prohibit them from performance. Under the equitable theory of injunction, N may recover or may have the court require Woody and Chuck to uninstall the septic system and return the vacant lot to its and return the vacant lot to its previous condition. Joint and several liability. Under joint and several liability, one party or one tortfeasor is liable for the torts, I should say, torts of the other tortfeasor. Okay. I say this: one tortfeasor is jointly liable, jointly and severally liable for the torts of the tortfeasor. For the torts of the other tortfeasors. Thank you, guys. Okay, now under contribution, we want to throw in a quick little discussion here. Under contribution, here here Woody may argue that C may need to apportion the damages. Let me rephrase that. That W may argue that C needs may argue that if W over that if N sues W for the total amount of damages, then W may seek contribution from C for the amount that W overpaid beyond his apportioned degree of fault in the situation. Okay. Okay. Here, W may argue that this is a really interesting one, indemnification. What they're trying to say is that one party should be completely liable in the event that if that party is sued, that the other party is completely okay, let me put it this way, that one party is to bear all the damages in the event that the plaintiff sues the party, and I'd have to show this to you, and I'll have to type this out to show this to you here, because actually it's a Chuck argument. Here, Chuck may argue that he is indemnified because of the vicarious liability between him and W. Accordingly, if C were sued for or sued by by neighbor for the total amount, C could recover that total amount from W. Okay. And I think we're going to throw in a conclusion here. Okay. And we're going to say, in conclusion, N may prevail. All right, that's this. We'll come up to our call, make sure we're answering our call. Okay. Okay, I got it now. Okay, we're making sure that we're making our conclusion statement pointed to our call. In conclusion, N may, I'm sorry, let me go back up here and grab the call again. And when I was going to type it, I forgot it. Thank you so much for your patience. What tort claims can neighbor reasonably raise against Woody? Okay, so I got it. And Chuck. May reasonably raise the tort claims of trespass to land, trespass to chattels, conversion, and conversion against Woody and Chuck, and may recover general damages, special damages, punitive damages, injunction, and I think the injunction. Okay. I think we got this thing. Excellent job, applicants. Alrighty. Now this is, remember, we're going to get stronger. The more we do, the more we get stronger. The more, like in a bodybuilding sense, the more weight you lift, the stronger your muscles get. The more essays you do, the better you're going to be able to do them in a quicker amount of time. And I thank you so much for staying with me throughout this whole process. I hope this was fun for you as it was fun for me. I enjoyed the whole process. Thank you for walking with me this whole journey through this paper, and I wish you the best of luck on the bar exam. And thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day.